The media have substantial culpability here, I think. I don't know what the running total is of how often Farage was on Question Time, but it was, over the last 5 years, it was substantially more than every other Green politician put together. Who knew? You give one party 10 times more coverage than the other and a load of big donations from billionaires, and in an unfair voting system where money has a disproportionate impact, they can get more votes.
In 2010, the Green Party of England and Wales won their first ever Member of Parliament. That was, of course, Caroline Lucas in Brighton Pavilion. And it stayed that way for quite a long time until this year. Because in the July general election, they quadrupled their number of MPs at Westminster from 1 to 4. The key number is this: they won over 1.8 million votes. That doesn't mean, however, that they have got a correspondingly large amount of media coverage, anything but, which is why we thought we'd try and rectify the situation, at least a little bit here at Novara Media, by inviting on one of the two-party co-leaders, and of course, the new MP for Bristol Central. Carla Denyer, welcome to Downstream.
Thanks for having me on.
I was mocked by so many people because I came to see you in, I think it was 2021.
Yeah, a while back, wasn't it?
And I took the possibility of you winning that new seat in Bristol Central seriously. It looked very possible, but far from probable. You won with a majority of more than 10,000 votes in the end. Yeah. How'd that happen?
Well, you're right. It wasn't anything like a given. And what I said, whether it was to voters on the doorstep or journalists or activists for the Greens, is that it was within our reach, but right up to the last few days, it wasn't firmly in both hands. We knew that Green Party policies are really popular across the country. I mean, independent polling repeatedly shows large majorities in favour of bringing utilities into public hands in terms of increasing taxes, including introducing wealth taxes. Obviously, in terms of going faster on the climate, the public are consistently ahead of politicians from other parties on that. So we knew our policies are popular nationally and specifically in Bristol. We'd seen our number of Green councillors go up substantially, and they did again after we met back then. And we knew that when people didn't vote Green, it was usually because they thought we couldn't get in or thought that they had to vote tactically. And we could demonstrate in Bristol Central that there was no possibility of the Conservatives getting in, so people could vote for the party they agreed with the most. And we knew they wouldn't do that automatically, but if we had enough conversations on doorsteps, people had enough of a chance to get to know me as a local campaigner, active member of my community, that they might come round, and they did.
What was the worst bit about the campaign, apart from the lack of sleep? Were there any sort of lows?
I was pretty good at making sure I got enough sleep, actually. I don't function very well on... I'm no Margaret Thatcher in more ways than one. I don't function very well on little sleep. So I tried to have 7 to 8 hours most nights, and there was only a few nights when I had an early start for an interview where I didn't manage that, thankfully.
What's your secret? Because it's a very high anxiety environment, hardworking. What's your secret? How do you relax?
I mean, just trying to have boundaries as much as possible. I tried to have at least half a day off a week, even in the short campaign. And I would usually spend that with friends doing something totally unconnected with politics, normally like cooking a curry together or something like that. That really helped, getting some exercise, getting outdoors, touching some grass. Just the normal stuff that helps you keep things in perspective.
So you're in Bristol. Where would you go to relax? Where's your favourite bit of nature in that part of the country?
Well, there's lots of lovely open green spaces around there. The ward that I used to represent for 9 years as a councillor, Clifton Down, which is lovely, but it actually doesn't have very much green space in it. It's got a couple of cute little pocket parks that most people don't even know about, hidden down residential streets, but it doesn't have a big public park. But right on the edge of it is the Downs, which maybe I shouldn't big up because it's not actually in my constituency. The boundary runs along the edge of it, so it's in Bristol North West, but it is the nearest big open green space to the ward that I used to represent and that I live in. And so that's a lovely place to get away, and it's absolutely huge. But also some of the parks in the city centre, Castle Park and Queen Square, if if you're kind of in the city, as I was sometimes working, I would take any opportunity I could just to go and sit on the grass and have a picnic and take a moment.
The west of England as well, it has its own sort of political climate, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So you've got the Forest of Dean, you've got Gloucester, you've got Stroud, you've got Bristol, you've got Hay, you've got the Welsh borders. And I think for people from the southeast of England, if they've never been there, it is almost like a foreign country in a way, in terms of the mindset, in terms of how relaxed people are, generally speaking, their views.
Yeah, I think that's true. I remember when I first moved to Bristol, which was about 15 years ago for my first job after uni, I really noticed how friendly people were. I grew up in the southeast, and sorry, people in the southeast, but Bristol was noticeably more friendly.
Where are you from originally in the southeast?
I'm from Hampshire, Surrey borders kind of area. That's where most of my family are from. I grew up in Fleet.
Fleet.
Yeah.
So very much Tory voting.
Yeah, although areas, I don't think Fleet's got any Green councillors yet, but there's a number of other Green councillors in nearby councils now, which is brilliant to see, including in Basingstoke, which is not the kind of place you would have thought would have had Green councillors until a few years ago. I'm really pleased to see that. As I say, it's something we've always known, that there were people all across the country that agreed with our policies. And what was holding them back was thinking that they couldn't get Greens elected, whereas now we've been able to demonstrate both at a local council level and at a national level, that if you want Green policies, you can vote Green, and increasingly you'll get more and more of us elected.
I felt quite bad because on the evening of the vote, you won. You were all smiles. You were smiling all day. It was great seeing you doing all pictures. And then there was Thangham Debonair looking very sour-faced, not clapping. But then later on, she gave her speech and she said what a great representative of Bristol you'd be. And I felt terrible because I sort of tweeted how sour she was. And then she gave actually this very nice...
I thought it was a beautiful speech.
Yeah, it was really moving, actually. I mean, how do you feel about Thangham Debonair? Do you feel sorry for her? Obviously, because her party's done so well. She's one of the rare cases of somebody who lost.
It must be hard when your party has done well, but you haven't personally. In fact, that's something that, as co-leader of the Greens for the last few years, I've been very aware of. And after each of the local elections, myself and Adrian and Zach, and actually previously Amelia, our former deputy leader as well, would call the council candidates that didn't get elected, even though they were targets that we thought reasonably could, because we know how hard it can be when you're one of the few that hasn't. And so we would split that list between us and call them all to make sure that they knew how much they were appreciated. So I hope somebody in Labour HQ has done the same for Thangham. And yeah, I've always been really clear that while she and I don't agree on every policy, it was nothing personal at all, me standing in Bristol Central. It's simply where I've lived for the last 15 years and where the Greens had a good chance of getting an MP elected.
Did they fight a clean campaign, Labour, in Bristol Central?
Yeah, fairly,
within the parameters of West, obviously no campaign's 100% clean, but yeah, within the parameters of sort of UK politics.
Yeah, fairly, I think.
Because there was that video of Owen going to sort of, quote unquote, harass them, which again I think is perfectly acceptable, and I thought their response was perfectly fine. But it was an interesting snapshot, and I wondered if it was a high temperature in the constituency. It was one of the very few constituencies, obviously, where Labour were under the cosh.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I obviously bumped into Thangham on the street when we were out canvassing a bunch of times, always sort of said hi and encouraged all of our volunteers to always be pleasant and polite as well. So
that's good.
Yeah, it's definitely important to me that you play the ball, not the player.
What are your first impressions of Westminster? You've been there best part of a month.
Gosh, it's really some of the traditions really don't feel like they're serving us anymore. I don't know if you saw, but one of my new MP colleagues, Ellie Chowns, gave a speech in the Commons chamber last week about how we could modernise the House of Commons. And a clip of it did quite well on social media because I think she really, really struck a note with a lot of people, from really simple things like there are not enough seats for all the MPs. And not just by a little bit, by about 200. So on busy days like the King's Speech or Prime Minister's questions, people are crowded in the aisles and in the doorways, and even then not everybody gets in. And, I and Ellie and Sian and Adrian all have experience as councillors. Ellie's also got an experience as a Green MEP, where you have a designated seat, and a designated microphone and a power socket where you can plug in your laptop. And we have none of that.
There are no chargers in the House?
Nope.
Wow. That's crazy. I'd never thought of that.
Yep.
So has everybody got their power bank kind of
Yeah, you're not. Well, yeah, you're not allowed to have a laptop in there. You're allowed to have phones and iPads. And I found out talking to a journalist earlier today that even in the press gallery, they're not allowed to have laptops.
It is interesting because with the King's speech recently, I saw some of these pictures. We talked about it on the show, and you have members of the cabinet like sitting on the floor and standing up, and you just think this is mad.
Yeah. Like, okay, if there's a good reason for a tradition and it's still serving us. Fine, I don't have an in-principle objection to traditions. But if we're doing them just because, like the other one that really I knew about before but I hadn't really quite grasped how central it was, is prayers. So every day at the beginning of the parliamentary session, session's the wrong word, parliamentary sitting for that day, we have Christian prayers. We all stand up for the speaker to come in, and then it goes straight into prayers after that. And the beginning of the prayers, you're all standing up in your seats facing into the middle of the room. And then at some point halfway through the prayers, you all turn around and face the other way. I don't understand why. And it seems a bit strange in this day and age to specifically have Christian prayers. Ellie said maybe it could be, we could take a leaf out of Radio 4's book with Thought for the Day and have sometimes prayers from other religions or kind of some points from humanists and so on. It just seems odd. And the thing that gets me about the prayers is that it is an integral part of making sure you've got a seat, because there aren't enough seats for everybody. So if you want to guaranteed have a seat in a good place, not be standing in the doorway, bearing in mind you're not allowed to speak in the chamber unless you're in one of the main seats. So this is pivotal of actually being an active MP. Then you have to turn up on busy days. You have to turn up when the chamber opens at 8 a.m, get a little bit of card, write your name on it, put it in a slot behind the seat you want to sit in, and then go away again and have some coffee or something. And then the staff in the Commons take them out of the slots and put them on the seats. And then when you come in for prayers, you take it back off the seat and put it in the slot, and then you've reserved that seat for the day. So it's like towels on deck chairs, basically, on sun loungers. And then you have to sit through prayers. So if you want to have a seat from which you can speak in the Commons that day, you have to participate in prayers, even if you're not religious or you have another faith.
Are you religious?
No. I am I'm a sometime attender at Quaker meetings.
I was going to say,
yeah,
give that vibe, Quaker.
I really like Quaker philosophy,
yeah.
But I'm what you would describe as a non-theist Quaker. So I'm kind of, I'm in it for the Quaker philosophy rather than believing in God myself. And, no problem to anyone that does, but it just seems odd to make it such a pivotal, virtually compulsory part of our democratic process.
Yeah, the whole sort of explanation just sounds incredibly protracted and strange. Like you say, if there's 650 people, just give them an allotted seat. And
yeah, exactly.
Is it true? Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say the voting system as well. Filing into lobbies rather than just pressing a button like we did in my old council chamber, or they do in the European Parliament. Ellie worked out that at the time she gave her speech, we'd had 4 votes so far. And she worked out the number of minutes each vote took and the number of MPs that took part. We'd used up about 150 person hours just on filing through lobbies. The
counter argument is that you get to collar a really powerful person.
Yeah, but
George Galloway during the Iraq War got to collar Tony Blair, and he said, he told me, you're going to do X, Y, Z, and Tony Blair said, yeah, we're going to go to Zimbabwe, yeah. Why not?
There are other ways to do networking. Surely you don't have to slow down the entire democratic process just to do that.
You probably know this better than I do. It's probably one of those old tales which I sort of didn't question. Is it true that there was the option to expand the chamber and Churchill said no?
I don't know.
I think there was. We need to fact check in the comments. I'm pretty sure there was some damage done to the chamber, and they said, "Look, we can expand."
This is the point where we knock through. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's make it large enough to be able to see all the parliamentarians. And they were like, "No, it was like this before. It will always be like this." Doesn't seem especially wise.
No.
What about subsidies for alcohol? Would you get rid of that?
Yes, definitely. I don't have a problem with alcohol being available in a few places on the estate. If you're wanting to have a celebration after getting a vote through, I don't think it's unreasonable to be able to get a cold beer somewhere. But subsidising it from the public purse? No way.
cheapest alcohol in central London.
Yeah.
People don't realise this.
I bet. I haven't bought one yet.
Parliament.
I have been working some very long days, so I haven't had the opportunity to have a drink in the bars yet. But the food's very subsidised as well. That I have, I guess, slightly less of a problem with, because workplace canteens are often subsidised in other workplaces, but subsidising the alcohol is just weird.
And what's impressed you about Parliament? You've said some of the bad things, not including the cooking.
The staff are great. They are incredibly knowledgeable, incredibly helpful. I've obviously only met a fraction of them so far, but they're all clearly there for the right reasons. They want democracy to work as well as possible, and they're there to help us out. I think special shout out to those in the House of Commons library. I've only had a little bit of interaction with them so far, but they are so helpful, and especially to opposition and backbench MPs, because of course the government has the entire civil service at their disposal. But MPs from other parties or backbenchers can go to the House of Commons library and ask them to do some impartial but quite detailed research on, give me a summary of studies that have been done on the effectiveness of this policy in other countries, and they'll pull it together for you.
What do you make of the claims? This is made by Ralph Miliband. Are you familiar with Ralph Miliband? He wrote a book called Parliamentary Socialism. No? I
haven't read it, sorry.
The green tradition, not the Labour left tradition. But he wrote a book, and he said, what we need is, let me get this formulation right. What we need is socialists in Parliament, not parliamentary socialists. I probably got this completely wrong way around. His point was we need people who are faithful to the values on which they're elected. And the problem is, once you go to Parliament, your loyalty, your fidelity is to the institution rather than the socialist movement. This is always his critique of parliamentary socialism. And one aspect of that is the literal grandeur of the surroundings. So if you're a regular person like these 4 new Green Party MPs, you go there with these principles, these values. I want to represent my constituents. I want to, change X, Y, Z about the country. And you go there and you are overwhelmed with centuries of history, storytelling,
grandeur,
identity, grandeur, beauty, excellence. And that, according to Ralph Miliband, is meant to almost overwhelm you into subordination and, doffing the cap. But do you feel that? Is that an analysis which has
it's certainly something I'm very aware of, and will hope to keep myself grounded. Obviously, I'm going to be spending about half my time up here, but half my time in the constituency. So I think, carrying on being a really active member of my community back in Bristol Central will help. But yeah, it is something I'm very aware of, and the sometimes disproportionate deference that you see in the House of Commons is something that I think all of us as Green MPs are going to be careful not to get sucked into.
Are you going to call each other out? Are you going to say, Adrian, this is you weren't like this before?
Oh, I don't know. Well, we'll have to see.
But how do you hold each other accountable as a parliamentary group? Do you have regular meetings, the full review, or
we're still obviously busy getting our feet under the table at the moment, but we are planning to have probably a weekly group meeting for anything we need to discuss as the 4 of us, because as you can imagine, once we're all on different committees and doing different meetings and interviews and so on, it's going to be quite tricky to get some time, the 4 of us together, but we'll make sure we do, because it's important that we have that strong working relationship. But at the moment and we're all still figuring it out. So we don't know what committees we're all going to be on yet. We haven't got our offices yet. So we're just in hot desking space, shared space, which is a room that's available to all the other parties. So Greens, Plaid, Reform and the Independents have all got the same room with only 8 desks in it.
So you're sharing a room with Farage, are you?
Well, I haven't seen any Reform members in there yet. I've only seen Greens and Independents in there so far, which has been nice, getting to know some of them. But yeah, the hot desking space is not ideal because it doesn't have any mobile reception.
My God. So you've got no office. Your staff, how does that work at the moment?
So we have some interim staff. Yeah. So because you have to get started straight away as soon as you're elected as an MP, you are allowed to just draft people in the short term. But obviously you need to run a proper open HR process eventually. So we've got some interim staff, not quite a full complement of what we'll eventually have. And we are currently recruiting for staff members. So I don't know when this goes out, but applications close on Wednesday afternoon. So if this is going out before Wednesday afternoon...
You've missed the boat. But, that's an important point, isn't it? That there's 4 MPs now and you're actually going to be hiring lots of... That's not something that Green Party members have had access to, which is jobs in Parliament until quite recently. Yeah,
absolutely. Obviously, the Green Party has some staff, although we run on a much more modest budget than the other political parties, which is why I'm so pleased that we've done so well, because we punched well above our weight. But yeah, having the funding to have more parliamentary staff supporting our Green MPs now will be really, really helpful. And yeah, it's an opportunity for Greens to come and work with us as well. So we've already had loads of applications for those jobs. Great. I'm excited to have a look at those and do some interviews in a few weeks.
Great. How did you feel about Dale Vince? So he's been funding Green stuff for years. I've had the pleasure of talking to him. Very interesting man, very interesting life story. Chief Exec Slavi Katristi.
Yep.
But he was in your constituency saying vote for Thangam Debonair.
To keep the Tories out, apparently. That was literally his line. And I had him down as quite a detail person, so I was surprised that he was saying that. I don't really understand why. He's clearly been proven wrong. There wasn't any risk of the Conservatives getting in, but he was campaigning in Bristol Central and Brighton Pavilion, I think, for Labour. So, yeah, I don't really understand it. He's done some good stuff in his career, but he seemed to, at one point, sometime in the last year or so, have a pretty dramatic sort of turn on a sixpence change of heart, where he suddenly thought Labour was the best thing since sliced bread and had never done anything wrong.
It almost seemed like a vendetta against the Green Party, because he was. It wasn't like he was going to places where it was a Green Tory marginal where you'd think, okay, no, you can turn Tories Green. You think that's what he wants. Yeah. He was going to Green Labour marginals to say, don't vote Green.
Yeah, and I saw after his post saying that he was campaigning in those places, a lot of people replying saying, what are you doing?
Yeah.
But, well, we got elected anyway, so it's okay.
Yeah. So you've got these 4 MPs.
Yes.
Why do you think you won 4 MPs? 2 in formerly Conservative constituencies, 1 in a formerly Labour constituency. What brings voters from places as different, seemingly, as Suffolk and Bristol Central and Brighton Pavilion?
So I get this question a lot, and often it's phrased to me in how are you going to bring together these disparate parts of the Green Party that have nothing in common with each other? But it's just not like that. Actually, what people want, what voters want, is broadly the same across the country, across different demographics, urban and rural, etc. They see that our public services have been chronically underfunded, not just over the last 14 years of Conservative government, but in some cases under Labour before that as well. They see that politicians aren't going fast enough on dealing with climate change. They see that our democracy isn't really fit for purpose. And they want politicians that they can trust, whose values they share, who are going to sort it out. And so, for example, the sewage in our rivers, that's something that was a really big concern for people in North Herefordshire, where the River Wye flows through the constituency and is a really kind of key part of the community. Likewise in Waveney Valley with the River Waveney, and in Bristol and Brighton, people enjoy nature. They enjoy going for a swim or a kayak or something, and they saw that the privatisation experiment with the water companies had utterly failed. And it's kind of obvious when you look at it, because water supply and sewage is a natural monopoly. You can't choose to be supplied by Yorkshire Water if you live in the southwest. So it's not surprising that when you add a profit motive, but with no competition, then you just end up with CEOs and shareholders creaming off all the profits, not investing in the infrastructure, and then you get sewage in your waterways. So we were the Green Party, the only party saying that it's not just about better enforcement or better regulation. It's saying this system isn't working, let's bring it back into public ownership. And that resonated with a lot of people. Likewise with public investment in public services like the NHS. Bristol's got a real shortage of dentists. Famously, there was a queue round the block for several days when a new NHS dentist opened. And I was hearing about children aged 7 who'd never been to a dentist yet. And it's just as bad in rural areas. Adrian said that he was hearing about examples of people pulling their own teeth out. So, yeah, I think we've got, as a country, more in common than that which divides us. And the Green Party's policies resonated as being common sense and what we needed, and not just tinkering around the edges, which I think is how people saw what the Labour Party were offering.
To an extent, I buy that. Some of it's very common sense, like almost centrism. If we're talking about the political centre in a meaningful way, as in where are most people at? Take water, for instance. I think that's absolutely right. It's a centrist policy. You're in tune with the political centre. But it still is intriguing that you're a party which is offering a UBI, 4-day week, which policies, those sorts of policies are very popular. People watching or listening to this, I'm sure. But it would surprise some people that there are former Tory voters in North Herefordshire voting for a party that backs a UBI. Or did they just not know you were offering those policies? Or do they not care because they're thinking, well, they're not going to form a government for the next 5, 10, 15 years, so whatever?
Well, okay, so first of all, we do want to head towards a system where we have universal basic income, where we recognise that the ability to feed your kids and put a roof over your head is a human right, and you shouldn't have to jump through hoops to demonstrate your eligibility for it. However, to be fair, UBI wasn't in this manifesto because we had to be realistic in our manifesto for this general election about what we might be able to deliver or push for as a group of Green MPs. But we were talking about things like increasing universal credit, lifting the 2-child benefit cap, improving workers' rights, rolling back the restrictions on the right to strike and so on.
But there were going to be the first steps into basically examining you support the UBI as a political party.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that it's just quite a popular policy. But people saw that as the Greens we were offering solutions to the problems right in the here and now. And I think that's what most people are most concerned about. Whether they're at the sharp end of the cost of living crisis themselves, or if they're actually quite well off, but they still have empathy because they were in a tough place once, or sympathy with people that are struggling. Like, going out door knocking in more rural areas. I remember speaking to an older woman who was retired. She was an owner-occupier, owned her home outright, but she still supported rent controls because her children or her grandchildren were struggling with housing in the city that they lived in. So people can see that systems need to change, even if it doesn't directly benefit them.
I also think voters are much more sophisticated than, as any elected politician knows, they're much more sophisticated and complex than the media picture generally depicts. So, like, I've met so many voters who they would love what you're saying on public services and water ownership, but they also really like what Nigel Farage says about migration. And the thing they might vote for reform, and they'll say, well, I don't like him on X, Y, Z. He's not going to be in power anyway. And he's saying X about this particular policy, which I kind of care about right now. So I'm going to go with him. Whereas in the national kind of conversation, these 4 million people voted for reform. They agree with absolutely everything that Nigel Farage says. It's obviously not true. And equally, the 2 million people that vote for the Green Party, they're not going to agree with absolutely everything you guys are proposing.
No.
It's going to be 3 or 4 things that, really hit the spot.
There's a lovely quote, and I can't remember who said it, so maybe people can say in the comments, which is politics, or maybe political parties, are like buses. You get on one that's going in roughly the right direction. I don't expect everyone who votes Green to agree with every single one of our policies. There's not many even members of political parties that agree with every single one of their party's policies. The point is you support one that is going in roughly the direction you want to go in. And I think for a lot of people, it became obvious to them that the Greens were the closest match.
What surprised you during the general election? Was there a moment you go, wow, I wasn't expecting that?
Well, that's a very broad question.
Nationally or locally? Because in the end, actually, but basically it panned out as we expected, even though it was a generational election.
Yeah.
There was no surprise in terms of poor Tory performance, or maybe you could say the Labour underwhelmed, I suppose, for the national vote share.
Yeah, I mean, it was nationally, it was roughly what I expected. Some people, including Labour politicians and campaigners, when we were saying the Tories are out, they're clearly on their way out, so you can vote as you wish. They were saying, oh, but don't never believe polls. And it's like, sure, if there's been 1 or 2 polls that have shown that Labour are going to win by 3%, then I wouldn't believe it. But there were over 100 polls showing Labour winning by a huge margin. So I was pretty confident that was going to happen. I'm not really a betting person, so I wasn't really interested in trying to put an exact number on it. And likewise with the Greens, I knew that 4 was possible. I didn't know that it was guaranteed. I certainly didn't expect that we were going to come second in 40 other constituencies. That was probably my biggest surprise, and just overwhelming feeling of gratefulness at all of the people across the country, not just in our 4 targets, who voted Green, because that's a brilliant platform to build from next time around. And it shows the level of support we've got nationally. We nearly doubled our vote share. And that, by the way, isn't just a signal to politicians from other parties about the kind of policies that voters want to see. It also directly helps us elected Green MPs to be more effective, because there is this thing called short money, which is very little known about. Basically, acknowledging the fact that the government has access to the whole civil service to do policy research and so on. MPs from opposition parties get a little bit of funding, a few pence per vote, for every vote they got in a constituency that didn't result in getting an MP elected. So if you voted Green in Newcastle, say, and you didn't get a Green MP elected this time around, but your vote will have put a few pence in the staff budget for mine, Adrian, Ellie and Sian's team. And so that means that we can do a slightly better job than we could have done otherwise of representing those people's views and doing the best we can in Parliament. And so that is part of the reason why over the last 14 years, Caroline Lucas punched so much above her weight, I think. I mean, obviously, she's just generally a wonderful human being, but part of the reason she seemed to be so superhumanly effective is that she had that short money from people that voted Green elsewhere. And in fact, we got so many votes across the country that we maxed out the amount of
it's like 500,000 or
we
something.
could get. I can't remember what the
That's
numbers
the ceiling,
are.
right? I think, or
I haven't remembered the numbers, but yeah, it means that we can do the best possible job as Green MPs. So thank you to everyone who voted Green wherever you were. It made a difference.
I think it's like if you get more than 5 MPs, it tails
Yeah,
off, and
so
so you're
there's
really
a-
in a great place.
Yeah, there's a cap for how much short money you can get, and it's connected to how many votes you got nationally and how many MPs you've got. There's a formula. But yeah, so every vote for the Greens everywhere made a difference.
How much did Gaza hurt the Labour Party, nationally and in your seat?
My impression is that it was the final nail in the coffin for a lot of people that had previously voted Labour, but it wasn't the whole story. So there were people feeling very fed up with the Labour Party long before the 7th of October. We were, Greens were winning seats in areas that had previously been Labour strongholds in council elections for the preceding few years, and people had been telling us on the doorstep why that was. And sometimes it was specific policies like U-turns on support for or failure to support striking workers on picket lines, the U-turn on the 28 billion climate investment pledge, flip-flopping on public ownership, but also in a lot of communities, especially in more deprived areas or people of colour, there was a sense of feeling taken for granted that has been going on and building for a number of years. And then as Greens, as we grew, we got capacity to campaign in more areas. People started seeing that Green candidates or councillors were really listening to people's concerns, helping them sort out problems, and were there all year round. They weren't just turning up for the last few weeks before the election. And this is obviously not, this isn't a universal truth. I'm sure there are many very hardworking Labour councillors, but it's certainly a story that I heard over and over again in a few areas that it was for a variety of reasons. And in Newcastle, we got 2 Green councillors elected in the local elections this May, one of whom is Muslim councillor living in an area with a fairly high Muslim population, and that was our first result of the night, was getting him elected. It was one of the first results in the whole country, and so all the media piled in and wanted to ask him what happened. And the interview he gave on Radio 4 was, I think, really instructive. He said, yeah, maybe Gaza was a factor, but people had been telling me that they've been feeling taken for granted for years, and it was about time for a change.
That's an interesting sort of analysis, because lots of mainstream media coverage almost looked at it as this is a block of voters on this one issue and they don't care about anything else. Obviously, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I can't remember which journalist nailed it, but someone said something like, Muslims care about potholes too. And yeah, of course, we're all, complex, fully rounded human beings. And yeah, no doubt Labour's initial very mixed messages around Israel and Gaza disappointed a lot of people. And I've no doubt that had an impact on the results, but it's just not as straightforwardly black and white as that was what tipped it, I don't think.
Because I wonder, looking at Labour in the last week in particular, renewal of funding to UNRWA, from today, this is going out on the Sunday, but today we're speaking earlier on in the week. It looks like we will see the end of arms exports to Israel. Not huge amounts of money involved, but still very significant. And you've also got, of course, Labour saying they won't stand in the way with regards to the ICC. And there may be arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant in the next couple of weeks. That's a really big deal. And that is a real break with Washington. And it's a real break with what the vibe was around Labour and Gaza before the election. And so I wonder, I think a lot of that is because 5 independents were elected over Gaza. The Greens have done so well, like you say, not just those 4 constituencies, but 42nd places. Wes Streeting almost lost his seat. Jess Phillips almost lost her seat. I do wonder, are they just thinking, okay, well, Labour Friends of Israel can have one perspective on this. This organisation can say this. These people can say this. But at the end of the day, my seat is up for grabs. And if I don't respond in a particular way, then I'm out. I feel it must be playing a major role in this massive volte-face we're seeing from Labour.
Yeah, and, credit where it's due. They are making some of the right decisions now. It would have been good if they'd had a stronger line earlier, before thousands of people died. I know they weren't in the government until recently, but I think if they'd had a clearer line that human rights and international law is for everyone from the start, then they might have been able to persuade the previous government to move their position. But yeah, they're heading towards a good position on it now. And as I said in my maiden speech, I will work with the Labour government on areas that we agree, but I won't be afraid to speak up where I think they're not going far enough. And so this is an area where the Greens have consistently called for a ceasefire, for the release of hostages, for the free flow of food and aid, medicines and so on, and for an end to the illegal occupation in Palestine. And we've been really clear about that. And it's about human rights and respect for the rule of law. So it was a bit disappointing to see the Labour government equivocate on that.
So what's the blue water now between the Greens and the Labour Party on Gaza? So you agree on ICC, you agree on UNRWA funding, or that was the lowest hanging fruit realistically. Recognising Palestine, they say they'll do that. Okay, whatever. They haven't done it yet. So if I just care about Gaza, why would I vote for the Greens and not for Labour, given what Labour's done over the last week?
What have they said recently on ending the illegal occupation? I don't know if I've heard anything definitive.
Well, the end of arms sales is premised upon various positions held by the ICC, one of which includes, of course, illegal settlements in the West Bank. So
it's kind of implicit, but not explicit.
So that's the major difference?
To be honest, I've been in meetings and interviews the whole of today, so you might have more up-to-date information on what they've said today than I will. But yeah, I think as the Greens, we also have long supported the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement as a legitimate, peaceful way of achieving political change and justice. And So yeah, I guess that's a difference as well.
Would you like to see Netanyahu face charges?
Yeah, absolutely. As should the leaders of Hamas, people who, if they are found guilty of war crimes, which I think they're likely to be, then of course they should face charges.
I doubt Starmer would say that. Although he has this very clever, mercurial line of, we respect international law, which, be fair to them.
Yeah, I don't want to just respect international law. I want to push for it.
Yeah. So, maybe one difference between you and the Labour Party is that you're a party of NIMBYs. That's what the Labour Party would say. They would say Adrian Ramsey is the NIMBY in chief. He wants more electrification, and yet he won't even have pylons in rural Suffolk.
This is so misleading and so frustrating. The position that Adrian has taken is not anti-pylon. He is supporting residents in his constituency to feed into a consultation, which closed at the end of last week. In response to earlier feedback, the National Grid have already said that they will put some parts of the pylon route underground, in particularly ecologically sensitive areas. And there's some other areas of feedback where the local community want to see something different. And as a hardworking constituency MP, Adrian has supported them in doing that. He hasn't at any point said, I want no pylons at all in my constituency or anything approaching that. In fact, his position is identical to local Labour politicians in the area. In fact, I think I heard that Labour councillors on Norfolk Council were more hardline. They were more anti-pylon than Adrian had been. So I think he's got a perfectly reasonable, nuanced position. But Labour have decided that that's the only chink in the Greens' armour that they can find, and they're going to go in it all guns blazing.
They really are coming for you on that. NIMBYism.
Yeah, but I just think if you actually look at the details, what Adrian is saying on that case and what Greens have said in other cases where Labour have attacked us in the past is, let's not make sweeping decisions on everything. Let's look at an application on a case-by-case basis and look at what's most suitable in this location. Same with renewables projects or housing or whatever.
HS2. There you go. That's a big difference.
That's a bit different.
Well, there was an instinctive, they would say, there was an instinctive NIMBYism against HS2 because of wildflower meadows or,
It's a bit more than just wildflower meadows.
No, I know. I'm trying to be a sort of annoying Labour MP who would attack you for this, right? Sort of minimising the...
So the thing with HS2 is the first phase up to the Midlands, that particular route had a lot of ecological damage involved in building it. And there were concerns that it would just turn Birmingham into a commuter town of London.
So there's a political and an ecological critique.
And the fact that it's been stopped at that point, in my opinion, makes all of those fears come true. We've done the most ecologically damaging bit that is just going to turn Birmingham into a commuter town, which I don't think is what the majority of people in Birmingham want. And yet the more valuable part of HS2, which was connecting up the north and freeing up capacity, now potentially isn't going to happen.
Is this clever politics, Carla? You're going to back the bit that Labour don't do, but you're going to oppose the bit that they do.
We already
have done.
At our autumn conference, we passed a motion that called for an investigation into the handling of this by the Conservative government, including the way that they salted the earth by selling off land so that potentially the later phases couldn't happen, and the general mismanagement. So I think even though there is a spectrum of views within the Green Party, a thing we could all agree on was that the Conservatives had handled it in the worst possible way.
Do you back Northern Powerhouse Rail?
I definitely back. I'm not wedded to what exactly it looks like, but I definitely back increasing capacity on rail in the north of England. And
new lines.
having travelled around the country a lot in my job as co-leader, I have experienced firsthand how bad some of those train lines are in terms of just simple lack of capacity in some of the major interchanges. That means it's so hard to get. Yeah, it is. And
between Manchester and Leeds.
And I personally and the Green Party want to see a massive investment in public transport infrastructure, including rail. We want to see that making sure that more and more people in the country have a good local railway station. So there's a role for high-speed rail, and we support high-speed rail in this country. We had concerns about that specific route, but we also want to make sure that there's good local networks so that everyone lives within a reasonable distance of a decent train station, and investment in buses as well. They're a bit less sexy, but they're really, really important. And the research shows that even if you don't care about the sustainability angle of climate change, investing in local bus services boosts the local economy. So it's a win-win. And that was one of the other concerning things about when the later phases of HS2 were scrapped, is that the Conservatives said that money would be ploughed back into transport, but then it turned out by that they meant roads, or at least in some cases roads, whereas clearly we're in a climate emergency. We don't need to be building more roads. We need to be building more public transport infrastructure that helps to get some people out of the situation where they're trapped using a car even when they'd rather not, because there just isn't the local services to support them. I'm lucky I live in a city that has a not bad public transport system. It could still be better. But yeah, if you're in somewhere like Waveney Valley, it's pretty much impossible to have a job without having a car.
Well, North Herefordshire, I mean, it's the size of that constituency.
Oh my gosh!
I mean, I think it's lost on people. It's one thing to canvass in central London, but North Herefordshire, I mean, I think it's like the size of like a London borough almost. I mean,
probably bigger. I would hazard a guess.
Kind of scary, you know.
Yeah, whenever we had occasional cross-team meetings for all of the Green Party's target constituencies, and in the Bristol and Brighton teams, we were not allowed to ever complain about the logistics involved in a canvassing or leafleting operation, because the North Herefordshire team would pipe up and say, "You don't know nothing."
Yeah.
But like their constituency, North Herefordshire is about a mile's drive north to south, and about an hour's drive north to south, and about an hour's drive east to west.
It's like a country.
Whereas
like
my constituency is less than half an hour's bike ride north to south and east to west. So it's just another level altogether.
The thing about high speed, though, this is interesting. So I would assess your politics as being a Green Social Democrat. Broadly speaking, you might not agree, you might disagree.
Yeah, Green politics are a bit of a separate thing from like socialist, social democrat. It's just a different branch of political philosophy. But close enough.
To 16-year-old A-level student, you'd be like, okay, this is how we're going to classify this person. But then there are people in your party, many people who are quote unquote deep Greens, anti-growth, not even degrowth, like some people almost would be sort of primitivist politics. You know, they think civilization was a mistake. So there are some people in the Green Party like that. Some people.
I've never met anyone in the Green Party that thinks civilization was a mistake.
Really? I have met them. I mean, I'll give an example. I know a person they've actually joined the Labour Party, but they're a Green, and they used to be a member of the Green Party, and they stopped hoovering their house because of the climate crisis. This is not a joke. Because they said, well, I want to reduce my CO2. And I'm thinking, well, it's electricity. And of course, what matters is where is that electricity being generated. So the idea of hoovering your house once a fortnight, that's not going to save the planet. But there is a part of your coalition which has these kind of funny ideas.
I think the vast, vast, vast majority of Green Party members and voters want to see a government enact policies that helps us to tackle the climate crisis and make the country fairer, and recognise that there is a role for individual behaviour change in that, but that it shouldn't hinge on that. We are not going to solve the climate crisis by individual behaviour change alone, even though it does help. And I'm vegan partly because of the environmental impact, but I know that on its own isn't going to change things enough. That's a case of like me and my conscience. And so what we need to do as a country is make sure that the greenest option is also the cheapest option, the most convenient, the most accessible. So that's why we support massive investment in public transport, a nationwide home insulation programme, so everyone gets lower bills as well as lower carbon emissions and a warmer, more comfortable home. All of these policies are a win-win-win. They're good for the economy, they're good for people's well-being, and they're good for the
But
climate.
there are some pretty strange ideas, and I view myself as an eco-socialist. I'm not attacking you. I'm part of that quote unquote coalition as well. There are some pretty strange ideas within the Green movement. Pretty strange, no?
Like what?
Well, so for instance, I was listening to Radio 4 and they were talking about the two-child benefit cap, which I know, of course, you oppose. And they were saying, I support the two-child benefit cap. This was somebody, they were calling in, they identified as, I think, quasi-green. I support the two-child benefit cap because it was going to stop overpopulation. And you do hear a lot of stuff like that. There's, and it's not surprising because, of course, overpopulation was a big part of the political debate for decades. Population bomb and Paul Ehrlich. It was in the wider culture for a really long time. But it can be quite anti-humanist. It can be quite anti-working class. Do you not ever encounter that?
Well, the population thing, I think, yes, there used to be a big debate around that. But personally, I feel that's been pretty comprehensively put to bed, that the problem isn't people having children. The problem is the growing inequality that means the absolutely super rich who've got more money than they know what to do with are often spending it in hugely wasteful ways that exacerbate climate change and other kinds of environmental degradation. And if we had a more equal society, then we would also have a greener society. And that's been at the core of Green Party policies since the Green Party was founded. That idea of climate justice and social justice and economic and racial justice and feminism and so on all being bound up together, and we have to tackle all those issues as one.
So in the 2019 general election, you got these two newish parties. I mean, obviously you had a member of parliament. You've been around for the best part of 5 decades. But in terms of the national political picture, two newish parties, Reform, the Greens, Reform.
Well, they weren't Reform then, of course.
No, yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the Farage PLC parties, or not PLC, sadly, limited companies. And they have these two almost ideal types, right? You are constituency-based, very democratic, bottom-up. Reform is pseudo-celebrity, very media-heavy, lots of money, lots of donors.
Not a membership organisation.
No, completely different.
Although apparently you can be a member of Reform now. I got corrected when I said this on Twitter a few weeks ago, although what exactly being a member entails, who knows? I suspect it's not voting on policy.
It's because they always, you hear Farage or Ben Habib, who they're presently arguing about this, and they say, we need to professionalise the party. And do you mean democratise? No, we need to hire more people. But what's interesting is, they get twice as many votes as you guys, which, given the money that was given to them isn't really a surprise. They had massive, massive money. They had more money, I think, during the election raised than the Tories did. But they clearly do very well with the media, and they have a very smart way of navigating media attention, particularly Farage. Is that something that you think you can learn from or imitate as Greens?
It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because often Reform got the headlines by being awful. And I'm not gonna be like, oh great, I'll just say a load of awful racist things as well. I'm not gonna do that. The media have substantial culpability here, I think. I don't know what the running total is of how often Farage was on Question Time, but it was, over the last 5 whatever years, it was substantially more than every other Green politician put together. There was a period of several years where Question Time didn't have a leader of the Green Party on once. They had Caroline as an MP when she wasn't leader on a couple of times, and that was it. And that same pattern is emulated on a lot of other broadcasters as well. And who knew? You give one party 10 times more coverage than the other and a load of big donations from billionaires, and in an unfair voting system where money has a disproportionate impact, they can get more votes. That shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. And amongst our many policies that would help sort out our broken democracy, ensuring that the funding for political parties is more transparent, more regulated, more tightly restricted, and we would even introduce public funding for political parties, which is a bit of a like, why should the public purse fund it? But actually, if all parties received a proportion of their funding from the public purse in proportion to how well they did in the last election or whatever, then that would be fairer than who has the policies that the billionaires like the most. And restricting, the size of donations, of private donations, would help to level the playing field and ensure that the parties that do best are the parties that resonate with the most people in terms of policies.
So what would be the cap for private donations?
I don't think our policies go into that level of detail of exactly what the number is, or if it does, I'm afraid I haven't memorised the number.
But like 5,000 is quite...
Well, I think...
There's no limit at the moment, is there, I think?
Yeah, I don't think so. But the point is, if people have done well financially and they've got a bit of money to donate, fine. But in the Green Party, we're funded by grassroots donations from our members and supporters. We've got a few larger donations, but they're nothing on the scale of the other parties. And I think that if we regulate financial donations to parties better, it will level the playing field, and it will mean that the politicians people see on their screens are more likely to represent their views. And I think we saw that a little bit with the TV debates in the general election. So not to blow my own trumpet too much, but after the first of the big TV debates, the BBC one, More in Common did a poll that asked, who do you think did the best? And I came out joint first place with Stephen Flynn from the SNP. Now, given that we're a pretty small party and that was my first ever TV debate, I was pretty pleased with that.
You were great.
So
you
everyone.
were both very good, yeah. That was accurate, I thought.
And that was a sort of growing theme then in response to the next few debates, was a lot of people, journalists and just, people getting in touch with me, stopping me in the street, saying, you were really good. It's a shame we don't hear from you the rest of the time. And I was like, yeah, I agree. And maybe if we did get because in the short campaign, the broadcasters are required to give us a proportionate amount of media coverage. The rest of the 5-year period, they're not. And we've seen the impact that had over that 6 weeks. And so if they were required to do that all year round, then maybe the results would be different.
I totally get that. But again, a skeptic might be watching this and thinking, typical lefties, Greens, whinging, whining. Aaron asked you, could you be more like Farage, court more controversy or more guerrilla marketing, politics, tactics? And you're saying this XYZ isn't fair. By the way, I entirely agree with you. And I agree with your proposals. But they would say, well, that's not where we are. You got to do something about it. And okay, BBC Question Time is very unfair. The broadcasters are quite bad, frankly. I mean, especially given how many, you've got almost 900 councillors now. It's kind of crazy. You've not had more coverage prior to this general election. But you've got to deal with what you've got.
You do. And we have...
And you could be more like Reform, There could be Carla Denyer wearing, I don't know, a Patagonia fleece on top of a mountain somewhere, talking about climate change, doing a selfie stick. You could do more of that stuff.
Yeah, I think we did do a little bit. Ellie did a brilliant video of her kayaking down the River Wye, talking about pollution while looking dead into the camera. Kayaking absolutely perfectly. It was, I admired her. She's clearly a very experienced kayaker. Yeah, we could do more of that. And I think we did a little bit in this campaign. We didn't quite go full wetsuit paddleboard like the Lib Dems did. Although one of my friends is a very keen paddleboarder, and also does acro yoga, when you sort of balance on each other. And as soon as Ed Davey fell off his paddleboard, I got a WhatsApp from her saying, do you want to come out on the paddleboard this weekend? I'll teach you to do a handstand.
Oh, really cool.
I didn't. Sorry.
But everybody was watching that campaign with Ed Davey and the Lib Dems. They got 72 MPs, right? Something like that.
70 something.
They're, the Liberal/Liberal Democrat best performance since the 1920s, I think. And everybody's saying this guy looks like an idiot, but it was arguably the most effective general election campaign in living memory by a party, given their resources, given they had eight seats from 2019. So again, I said Farage and Reform, but like you say, the Lib Dems, more stunts.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. maybe that's something for us to think about for next time. But I think that people appreciated the fact that we were offering common sense and substance for the most part. And while Ed Davies' stunts did get him a lot of media coverage, I think some people were still left not totally clear what it was they were actually offering. But, fair dues to them. They did well. And as I said, we'll work with politicians from various parties on areas that we agree. With the Lib Dems, we agree on proportional representation, for example. They also now agree with us on lifting the 2-child benefit cap. In the Chamber this week, I asked some questions in Home Office questions about lifting the ban on asylum seekers working, and there was a Lib Dem asking a question on that as well. There are areas where we have overlapping policies, and we'll work together on those. And so having more, aside from the whopping Labour majority, there is generally a good bit of political diversity in the Commons chamber now, and I think that's positive. And we've already had some nice examples of working cross-party on areas we agree. I put in an amendment to the King's Speech, which was co-proposed by some independent and Plaid, and I think, if I remember correctly, I think one of the now not Labour MPs. And in turn, I co-proposed some of their amendments and any early day motions and so on. And I think that's how progressive politicians have to work, working cross-party, not being too tribal.
So those 7 Labour MPs, or formerly Labour MPs, they're formerly Labour for the next 6 months. They may be allowed back in. I think some might be, some might not be. Would you like them to join the Green Party?
It's not really my decision. So
would you like them
obviously anyone can regular person on the street, you can just join the Greens, please do. If you are a high-profile defector, we do have a process to check that there is values alignment, so it wouldn't ultimately be my decision. If any of those MPs applied, I think we should seriously consider it. I probably don't know enough of the detailed background and policy positions of all of them to say straight off the top of my head.
But John McDonnell, for instance, he was going to be at loggerheads with Labour anyway because of Heathrow. If there's a third runway there and Labour back it, he'd be in trouble because that's his patch. I mean, that sounds to me like a perfect fit for the Greens.
Sure. Off the top of my head, I honestly don't know, and this is perhaps my culpability that I don't follow every twist and turn of what other politicians are saying all of the time.
But would you want them to join? Because you've done so well growing from your own base this year, right? Not doing that whole defector thing. Would you want them to join?
Yeah, I think the Green Party's approach is always going to be focused on that grassroots, bottom-up, connected to our communities kind of growth. And whereas Reform, in contrast, is all about making a political point and putting pressure on the Conservative Party, and I strongly suspect they're doing a lot of courting of certain Conservative MPs at the moment and probably proactively trying to get a load of defectors. I'm not proactively...
You're not doing that?
I'm not proactively trying to say, come here, but if they want to join, I think a lot of them will find that they overlap a lot more with Green Party policies than they do with the Labour parties these days. Then fair enough, we'll put you through the vetting process and we'll see.
Jeremy Corbyn? Was that a bridge too far?
It's really not my decision, and I'm not gonna discuss hypotheticals.
But would you like Jeremy Corbyn?
I just think it's extremely unlikely. He's been an MP for a very long time. Yeah. The Green Party has existed most of that time. He could have joined at any point before now. He hasn't. I just think it's vanishingly unlikely. But we will work together on areas where we agree, and Jeremy Corbyn and I have signed a couple of each other's amendments and early day motions already. So, yeah, of course, we'll, just as Caroline Lucas did, we'll work together on areas we agree. He cycles, he's vegetarian. It's all Makes there. Nice jam, apparently. Yeah, it's all there. So my final question really is this, and it fits with what you were saying. It's about the future of the Green Party and decisions made in the last general election and how those things fit. So some people would say if the Greens hadn't stood in Ilford North, then Leanne Mohammed would have beaten West Streeting. Why didn't you stand down? Then, then this candidate who's
arguably more aligned with your values and your policies, they would have won. And that argument was brought into sharp relief with what happened recently in Godalming and Ash. You had your candidate there withdraw a few days before the election. It was a Lib Dem Tory marginal with Jeremy Hunt. Jeremy Hunt won. That person's now been suspended, I think, till 2029 or something.
So
it's a councillor there, I believe.
In the Green Party, as in most, if not all, other political parties, if you as a party member actively campaign for another political party against a properly selected candidate of your own party, then you forfeit your membership of the party. That's a pretty standard policy, and without that rule in place, it would be hard to run a political party, to be honest. Compared to the other parties, the Greens are very democratic. You know, our policies and our strategies are set by our members, one member, one vote at conference. And at our autumn conference, a motion was brought to the conference plenary saying that we would have a strategy of standing a full slate in this general election, and candidate selection would be done by local parties, but that if local parties didn't initiate candidate selection, either because they didn't have the capacity, because they were low on active members, or for whatever reason, then the National Party would be able to initiate candidate selection. We wouldn't helicopter candidates in, the selection would still happen locally. And that motion passed conference very easily because our members were pretty united about the fact that over the last few general elections, we had tried to cooperate with other parties to get the Conservatives out, and the other parties had, not all of them to be fair, but had not really cooperated back. And that meant that we were just rolling over and handing out gifts to other parties in exchange for nothing in return. And that didn't get any more Green MPs elected. It massively reduced our national vote share, which means that we didn't know where we might be able to win seats next time. We lost out on a lot of that short money, which meant that our one Green MP was able to be less effective. And we were denying the ability to vote Green for a proportion of the population who were writing to us saying, I wanted to vote Green, but you didn't have anyone on the ballot. Well, it's just not very good democracy. We wanted to give everybody the chance to vote Green. If there had been noises about cooperation coming from the other parties, and other candidates, then maybe we would have cooperated. But there was absolutely no sign of that whatsoever. So, in the absence of any willingness to cooperate, and given that it was really clear the Conservatives were on their way out anyway, it was clear that the best strategy for us as the Greens, but we think for voters generally, was for the Greens to stand a full slate, so everyone had the opportunity to vote Green. But we focused our campaigning effort on the 4 constituencies where we knew we had a good chance of getting an MP elected, and it worked. That strategy got us a quadrupling of representation in the House of Commons and a nearly doubling of vote share nationally. Without our strategy of stand a full slate and focus our campaigning effort on those 4 seats, that wouldn't have happened. So I absolutely stand by that strategy. I think it was the right one to take. And now, you know, not getting overexcited, but we will start before long thinking about what happens in the next general election. We'll think about that strategy. But I think that the fact that we stood a full slate everywhere showed what the appetite was for getting more Green MPs elected, and maybe we can make the next leap next time around.
So no regrets? Because a critic would say, you're why Jeremy Hunt and Wes Streeting kept their seats.
I think that's debatable, because there are constituencies where the Greens took substantial votes from the Conservatives, including in Waveney Valley and North Herefordshire, where we got Green MPs elected. And so if we had campaigned more in Godalming and Ash, we didn't campaign there, then we may have taken more votes from the Conservatives and the Lib Dems might have got in. I think there's certainly an argument that could have been the case. But the fact is we didn't do much campaigning or any in other constituencies. Some places got a leaflet and a little bit of campaigning, but we focused the vast majority of our resources, and I think it was that relentless focus that's what got this result that everyone's so excited about.
Final question. How many seats are you going to get in 2029?
I knew you were going to ask that. We are working out the answer now. It would be foolish to jump ahead and give you a number. So I know that you interviewed my colleague Chris Williams, our head of elections, a few weeks ago. He and his colleagues are busy crunching numbers right now to look at what is a realistic target for next time around. We had a political strategy that got us to this point. We will be drafting a new one, and that will have the target for the number of MPs we'll try and get next time around. And the considerations will be, where we did well this time, but also what we think we can manage in terms of capacity, fundraising, member and volunteer capacity, and so on. So it's not the kind of thing that it's wise to just give you a number off the top of my head, but I certainly think we should make substantial
in this
gains.
election you were targeting 4, right? You could say...
Yes,
we'll
but
be
we were
targeting
targeting 4, having done a lot of number crunching and a lot of evidence-based strategy drafting. Whereas if I gave you a number now, it would just be out of my ear. So I'm not going to do that. What I will tell you, though, is that part of our political strategy, which we haven't met yet, but which I hope still can, is getting our first Green on the Senedd in Wales.
Which is next year.
And in the Senedd, it's exciting because the boundaries are changing in a way that makes... we don't know exactly how they're going to be divided up because they're sticking different parliamentary constituencies together. But it's looking likely that there will be a seat in Cardiff that should be winnable for the Greens. Not taking anything for granted, but certainly very promising, and we will be campaigning there.
Carla, thank you so much.
Thank you.